the combination of the kind of scavenger hunting Easter egg element of it with this idea that you know me so well because you are my biggest fans created this like kind of very strange, weird moment of Taylor Swift fandom.
Brittany Spanos is a pop music journalist and senior writer with Rolling Stone magazine, who's taught a course at NYU called Topics in Recorded Music, Taylor Swift, which analyzes the, quote, culture and politics of teen girlhood in pop music, fandom, media studies, whiteness, and power as it relates to her image. Whether you love her, hate her, or couldn't care less about her, Taylor Swift is the most talked about celebrity in the world right now. And for our purposes today, we are talking about conspiracy theories that come from within the hardcore Swiftie fan base and the ones that come from outside, often from the right-wing media. As we heard about in our recent episode on the conspiracy theory that Elvis Presley faked his death, believers claimed that the truth could be found in signs and symbols left for fans. And this made me think about the Easter eggs that Taylor Swift inserts into her work, little puzzles for obsessive Swifties to interpret that provide answers about her upcoming music or her meaning behind certain lyrics. But many who follow her every move have taken her occasional use of secret messages and expanded it into a false universe, claiming that she is communicating covertly about personal matters that she almost certainly is not, like her unspoken gay relationships. Brittany will take me, your relatively ignorant host, to decode the Easter eggs of Taylor Swift, both real and imagined. And we will also discuss the rampant conspiracy theories that have been bubbling up lately around this teenaged country star turned massive pop icon, and what it is, specifically, that makes her a perfect villain for these sensationalized fabrications. I'm your host, Chelsey Weber-Smith, and this is American Hysteria. I'm so excited to welcome Brittany to the show to talk about a topic that I've wanted to cover for so long, and the time's finally come. It finally fits in to what we're talking about, and that is Taylor Swift and all of the conspiracy theories and hidden messages around her and her music. Welcome, Brittany. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So the first thing I'd love to do is get to know kind of the work that you do and what brought you into this place where you are one of the Taylor Swift experts out there. I know you taught a course at NYU about Taylor Swift and the phenomenon around her. Can you tell me what inspired you to create that course? Like, what is your relationship to her music, and what brought you to want to do something as big as create a course about Taylor Swift?
Yeah, so I teach the course at NYU, and I myself attended NYU as an undergrad. And I didn't study within the Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music, but I took a lot of these 2-credit classes that were based around different genres and scenes or artists, like David Bowie, the history of punk, history of Nirvana and grunge. So those were really formative for me as a music journalist. And since graduating, I've been working full time at Rolling Stone, and I'm a senior writer there, and I cover pop music. And I'd always really, really wanted to teach one of these courses because while I took them, they were taught by journalists that I now have worked alongside with or know, personally and professionally, as well as musicians and people who work full time as professors. So it was a huge goal of mine, and I kept in touch with the head of the program. And I mentioned one day that I would really love to teach one of these. And I have a few artists that if I, need to walk into a classroom tomorrow, I could probably teach a 2-hour lesson on with no preparation. And Taylor Swift was, of course, one of them. She's someone I've covered very extensively at Rolling Stone, and she's someone I've been a fan of for a really long time. So that's how the class came to be. And it's really fun and fulfilling. And the program that's in Clive Davis is filled with students who are studying to work in the music industry in some capacity, whether that's as musicians themselves, producers, engineers, or managers, A&R, things like that. So, it's a really great perspective for this type of course.
I would have just absolutely loved to take this class in college. There was a wait list, so I don't know if I would have got in, but it makes sense to me. Taylor Swift, I feel, is a rich text. Both her music, her lyrics, the entirety of her kind of catalog and how she exists in the world, her history, her part in the culture. It's a rich text. So it makes sense to me that this would be enough for a course. And I personally used to be a hater of Taylor Swift. I mean, not like actively. I just was kind of like, I don't get that. But then my partner introduced me to Lover, which was the album that transformed me into a fan. And I think that it's important because a lot of our listeners are going to be coming from different places. We might have some Swifties, we might have some haters, we might have some people who are pretty neutral and don't know much about this. So I like the way you approach Taylor Swift because you do so with the understanding that she is not perfect and you embrace the flaws, I think, in the artists you cover. So would you talk a little bit about that relationship that you have to her and what it means to you?
Yeah, I think with how fandom works today, it's sort of a weird interchange between celebrity and their stands where there's this idea that a celebrity needs to be 100% perfect. We, have had the kind of your fave is problematic Tumblr back in the day. And there are threads constantly of like, here's why so-and-so is a bad person. And it's, they ignored someone on the street one time. It's like, there's this idea that a celebrity sort of needs to be kind of an exemplary, upstanding citizen of the world. But that's just not how artistry works or how we should look to our artists or kind of what we should expect from them. But I think at the same time, like the way stands also function is that weirdly, if you are a super fan of someone, you look past a lot of things and you over defend them, and anyone who believes them to be not a perfect godlike human is an idiot. So it's kind of a strange thing where you kind of wield it against people that you don't like, or if you really, really love them, you kind of look at them as, again, like a godlike figure. And I don't think any of that's realistic. I don't think any of that's fair. And I don't think that's a good way to interact with an artist or someone who creates, a song that you really connect with or love, or an album that you really connect with or love. That just is not a proper way of kind of interacting with art. So, it's a big part of the class where we go through and talk about, the parts of Taylor Swift as an artist a person might not agree with or have a hard time like connecting with. I think that's just a part of any sort of person who creates something that you love. They're not going to be a perfect person that you agree with all the time. I listen to a lot of people who I don't, agree with them politically or, kind of stand by their views, at all times or things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it also comes down to the fact that these are artists who are often, struggle in different ways. And once people reach a certain level of fame, they're sort of expected not only to be perfect, but to take anything that comes at them from their fans. I mean, I think Chappell Roan speaking out recently about the treatment, of herself from her fans. I think that's really amazing because I just can't imagine being a pop star. Like for me, that sounds like an absolute nightmare. And I know that that's not most people, but like, I don't know. I have a lot of empathy for our pop stars. It just seems like it would be a terrifying experience.
Yeah. I mean, there's just because of social media, even more so now, there are just so many eyes on you and so many people discussing you at all hours of the day. And that just like did not exist before, it was just like, yeah, like there's like famous people would have, conversations and stuff like that. But like you have to watch in real time people debating you constantly like on several different platforms at once, having a million different opinions on you. It's just like not a natural way to kind of live. Like it's a weird form of surveillance that exists, at this moment of kind of how people interact with it. And people are expecting so much, like constant comments, people want celebrities to speak on everything. They want to hear their opinions on everything. They, want to know what clothes they're wearing. They want to know what like their favorite restaurants are. They want to know like, how they kind of stand on any sort of issue that exists. And, it's just kind of a really intense sort of public and celebrity exchange that really happens at this moment in time.
It's not new, right? We did an episode called Fangirls where we kind of looked at the history of the relationship between fans and, in this case, mostly male identified artists. We go back to like Franz Liszt, who was, this famous piano player that caused, a total stampedes of fans, long ago. And we have Frank Sinatra, Elvis, the Beatles, up into boy bands, and Britney Spears, of course, which I feel like is probably, our best parallel to Taylor Swift if we go back, 20 years. And I'm wondering what else you see, because you've mentioned the internet, which I feel like is the biggest thing. But what differences do you see in the kind of Swift mania versus the relationship we had to, say, Britney Spears, or even, farther back than that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's because she sort of traversed like multiple moments in kind of how fandom has functioned over the last nearly 2 decades, which is like pretty insane to sort of like continue to be at your height as, just the way that people consume media, consume, tabloids and celebrity culture, the way conversations around those have shifted, even from, the time that she debuted in 2006 till now. The way that her fandom has functioned is kind of, when it first started out, was so much just about kind of connecting with the music and connecting with, here's a teen girl singing about teen girl things. And here are millions of teen girls who can relate to that, to kind of her as this like very, and it's fascinating now because this has shifted even from the last time I taught the class, which was in spring of 2023. But like it's kind of almost like a sort of deified version of a celebrity, which, I don't think that we've really had on this level. I don't know. I guess I would maybe say like closest was maybe like Michael Jackson in that way. But again, like, social media, it just sort of changes the perspective of those things in a way. But yeah, I mean, it's just kind of like a really, really all consuming type of fandom that's existing right now. It's like the nature of the music being really massive, and that's already such a big deal. It's the nature of the tour being one of the biggest to have ever existed. It's the nature of being kind of this type of figure that if you use her name or attach to something, it's going to sell. There are like Taylor Swift themed parties that sell out. There are outfits or things that are like replicas of things that she wears that sell out. You kind of like have this sort of attachment of the name of Taylor Swift to anything. It's bound to do well. You see that with even artists that she co-signed, after being on tour with her, being friends with her, or like being supported by her, tend to do extremely well. It's kind of a next level version of like pop star capitalism that we really have never experienced before. And it's very fascinating to kind of see how it's only gotten bigger, even just in the last 2 years. It kind of always existed with her just because of the function of like how intense her fandom's always been. But, the last 2 years specifically, with Eras Tour becoming such a big monocultural moment, it's kind of become like even more massive.
I mean, my conspiracy theory is that Taylor Swift never sleeps, because I cannot believe her tour plus making new music plus recording old music. I just don't understand how a living person can do what she does in that way. And I think another part of what makes her so unique in the history of pop music is, and of course, I don't know what goes on behind the scenes, but it does seem like she has a lot more control over her image and over what she communicates to her fans. And that closeness, I assume, is part of the fandom. And I remember even being a teenager, and I mean, I listened to like Bright Eyes as a teenager, right? So it was like you're still trying to get to know this person that you're listening to, this, indie star, whatever, but you're sifting through the lyrics. You're like, oh, I think this is a reference maybe to like this other musician in the scene. And you're doing this kind of stuff to put pieces together. And that is like obviously a huge part of the Swiftian phenomenon. And that's really what I wanted to get into today. So I would love to kind of hear about how the whole Easter eggs thing began, where Taylor was putting secret messages into her music. Because is it true that she kind of started that, or were fans trying to find that and then she kind of gave that to them? How did that unfold?
Yeah, it started with her. She's very much a marketing genius, and it's a big part of the class. And it's a big part of why I find it really fascinating, and the students will find it really fascinating, is she has always been first and foremost someone who connects with her fans in a very personal way, even when she's the biggest star on the planet. She always used social media as a way to really connect with them. She uses her music, of course, is very personal. But, she started to kind of do these like hidden messages in her liner notes. So she would kind of like capitalize letters in the lyrics of, back when everyone had like physical CDs, she would use the liner notes where the lyrics would be written out in the booklets of these physical CDs and put like little messages within the songs. So you'd put together and it would be like 22, for example, in red had like the names of her best girlfriends were all in the song. All Too Well, very famously, the hidden message in it was maple latte, which confirmed that it was Jake Gyllenhaal, because there were photos of her and Jake Gyllenhaal getting maple lattes in Brooklyn. So, it's stuff like that where she would do these like little messages in the song. And it was, just a way that people connected. One of my favorite things that she did was during the Speak Now tour, she would write a lyric from another popular song on her arm every night. And so, she had like, there was a night where like Bruce Springsteen, I think, was at the show, and she did lyrics from the song Glory Days on her arm. She did like lyrics from Free Fallin', it was like, other very famous kind of classic songs that she would write the lyrics to. So, it was a part of her, not in the way that it exists now, where it's way more intense and kind of this like you are seeking out a scavenger hunt to know what the next thing is. For her, it was more just like, here's a way for you as my fans, as my most, I guess, like intense sort of, my biggest fans, to get a deeper understanding of what I'm doing or what the song is about, or kind of where I'm personally at. So, that was how the sort of Easter eggs started.
Okay. And how are fans interacting with these Easter eggs? Because obviously it's like an online phenomenon. Like, what is the collaboration between fans like out there?
So the first time I noticed the Easter eggs becoming a bigger thing was the rollout of Lover. And that's kind of where I feel like it shifted a little bit more. I can't recall anything like super intense with Reputation before it. But with Lover, she was doing this thing like where all of her photo shoots, and I guess also it's because like she hadn't done press around Reputation. So she was starting to do press again. And, she would kind of like, she had a picture of 3 like baby chicks dancing in like a painting in the background of like a photo, or I think of a music video or something. And that was meant to be an Easter egg. The chicks were going to be on the album. There was like buttons that sort of had like hidden meanings about like different song names and things like that. So she was sort of she indicated to people that she was making clues as to what the album would be about, who would be on the album, things like that. So that's sort of the first time I noticed where the Easter eggs themselves were becoming, again, more of a scavenger hunt and less of here's unlocking a deeper meaning to the song itself. And then it's just kind of spiraled out. It's a mixture of both her doing this, like she loves an Easter egg. She's kind of become very like a fan of it herself and of doing it, but also the fans are seeking them out in everything, especially with the re-records, the Taylor's versions. She's been doing sort of that kind of cryptic, she's posted a video before a lot of them where it announces like the vault. She adds kind of these songs that were recorded during the era of the albums when they were originally released, but she never released these songs. And so it's a whole thing that she's done that looks kind of Zodiac killerish. During the concerts, like wearing certain colors each night that have kind of indicated to fans that maybe something's coming, maybe announcement is coming, maybe there's going to be news tonight, maybe a new video or something. Like, there's a lot of things that are both, she is actively doing that, but also the fans spend a lot of time trying to decode every single thing that she wears, says, does, hand symbols, likes on TikTok, comments, the way that she puts a caption out. If she puts like a peace sign and multiple captions in a row, what does that mean? So it's become like a very intense exchange of, what is an Easter egg, what is not, what is reality, what is not. It's like a very wild thing to watch as even someone who is a big fan of Taylor Swift to like kind of witness it is very extreme.
Yeah. And I mean, do we usually find out the things that she meant? Like, is it clear eventually that she was doing this certain sign or she was wearing this certain color, or is it all kind of a mixture of mystery?
It's a mixture. It's for sure a mixture. I mean, there is a lot. I would say the pattern I've noticed with the Easter eggs that are Taylor Swift herself they're pretty obvious and they're pretty simple. She kind of keeps it pretty straightforward with the way that she rolls out certain things. Even just like leading up to the announcement of like 1989, like it was really the way that she just hinted at it throughout the night of the LA concert when she announced it was she just changed all of her costumes to blue. It wasn't like anything super over the top. Most of the time, though, I feel like it is a lot of the fans kind of seeking out stuff. And, I think some of it ends up being sort of like accidental. They see her hanging out with someone and they realize that like this person seems like they would maybe be on this album or the song, and like it ends up working out. She happens to wear a certain color of sock and it works out that it kind of fits into something that she announces 6 months later. Who knows? But like it's mostly kind of fan driven now, where there's a lot of reading into every single thing, tend to be wrong 90% of the time, but I think feel very, very motivated by the 10% when they have been right.
More after this. And now back to the show. It has so much in common with like conspiracy theorists and people who are, and we'll get it. I want to get into a little bit of like the conspiracy theories about her eventually. But I think, there's a conspiratorial mindset, one that's like generally innocent around Taylor Swift, where it's like, it's the same process, I think, that people go through looking for clues, looking for hidden meaning that's, often not there. But of course, you can draw parallels all the time. You can do that with anything, and you can make it make sense when you fit these pieces together. And, continuing on the fandom and they're looking for secret messages, something that I don't know enough about, and I feel like I really should, is the Gaylor phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love if you would walk us through that whole thing.
Yeah, I think I would say first off, like a big thing with any big artist is that they're always, unless of course they are actually out and proud and living as a gay person, there's always like a ship or something, or like a kind of like rumors or conspiracy theories about them being in secret closeted relationships. I don't know why. I have not figured out why that exists. It is something that like I've noticed with like a lot of fandoms, of music fandoms, especially for boy bands, rock bands with mostly men in them. That kind of goes back decades. It is like really like a big part of it. But again, Taylor Swift, massive, huge fandom. And a lot of her career, there have been a lot of factions of the fandom, very, very small factions of her fandom that have believed her to be closeted gay or bi. And there have been theories about it. And it kind of, the biggest point in it existing was when she was best friends with the model Karlie Kloss. And this was during the 1989 era. And she's talked about more recently where she kind of spent a lot of that era trying to make sure that at the forefront of her image was her with her friends and hanging out with her girls rather than being connected to a famous relationship with a man at that time. But her and Carly had a very specific sort of like tight best friendship. They did like Vogue photo shoots together. They were going to like Knicks games. Carly basically like lived at Taylor's apartment in Tribeca, and it created like a really, really big fan theory called Taylor, which is Carly and Taylor. And that's kind of existed for a long time. It was, I would say, Gaylor has always been like a very, very small, it for a long time was a very small kind of portion of the Taylor Swift fandom. I would say there's a lot of theories that like Reputation was about Carly, that Lover has a lot of songs about Carly, you know, that songs on Folklore and Evermore had songs about Carly. It was just like, you know, there's a lot of kind of ongoing theories of different songs or different, again, hidden messages within the songs that are meant to sort of be Taylor signaling to her, I guess, like in most of the examples, like her ex, who they believe to be Carly Kloss. And it really kind of reached a pretty massive moment a couple of years ago. And it kind of was around the release of Midnights that it just like became like a really, really big part of the fandom. It seemed to also, I mean, I feel like it coincided with the fact that Taylor herself was becoming even more famous, even bigger at this time. Obviously not even the biggest that she would reach in her career, but it sort of became like a really, really large part of it. And I feel like it was egged on by TikTok, because TikTok kind of thrives on things like this, on theories, on people sort of snowball affecting any sort of piece of information, true or not. And so, you know, it reached like this really, really massive moment. And it's, again, like it's a lot of fans reading certain signals as Taylor signaling things to them. So they looked at the usage of the colors, especially during the Lover era. She was using a lot of rainbows. She wrote like a song about gay rights and did a video about gay rights. You know, that was seen as kind of quote unquote queer baiting. And I think with Midnights, it was a lot of like bisexual lighting and the phrase lavender haze. Yeah, there's a lot of idea of like what that, or like the term lavender can mean. She was using it in a Mad Men way, I guess. I don't know. It's just like a lot of kind of trying to connect certain things, looking at everything as an sort of Easter egg and theory, and kind of making it a pretty complicated relationship between her and her fans at this point, because it also created a lot of anger at the idea of her staying in the closet, which is, again, a very fascinating kind of push and pull that it's led to.
Yeah, to be angry at someone for being in the closet, but we don't actually know if they're in the closet.
Yeah, it's the reaction to it is, I think that's what's been most fascinating to me as someone. I mean, I've been aware of it for a really long time. And I mean, I always kind of just like, I was like, oh yeah, Carly and Taylor love that. Like if that's like, I was like, if that's true, that's great. But like, you know, her relationships have been with men publicly. And, you know, I think my stance is take someone for their word, or who they are present to be, whatever. But yeah, I mean, the anger towards her, especially during Midnights, that she kind of reaffirmed her relationship with Joe Alwyn, who she was with at the time, in the way that she spoke about Midnights and the way that she spoke about the album, and kind of expressing a little bit more anger towards her fans than she really had ever done before. And again, anger is a strong term for it. It was a pretty mild sort of chastising of them. But yeah, it was very interesting watching the Easter eggs kind of, or like, I guess, like scavenger hunting of clues from Taylor kind of weirdly flip at that time.
I really spin out of control. Yeah. So what did she say when she addressed this? I remember it happening, but I can't remember.
So she had done a video where she was going through all of I think this was the first time that she had spoken about it, but she was doing like TikTok videos about each of the songs on Midnights. I do not think the song titles had been announced in full yet, if I remember correctly. I think she was like slowly announcing the names of each of the songs via this TikTok video series. So people didn't know that Lavender Haze was a song yet, I believe. And the song itself is about people having expectations for a relationship that she doesn't want to abide to, and kind of her like defending her relationship. And more so reads again, sort of like media expectations for her to be a wife and whatever and things like that. And in the video, she had talked about how there are ideas about her relationship that may not be true. It was, I guess, sort of like gently chastising both her fans and the media for having any sort of like ideas about who she is or her romantic relationship that isn't true. She went hardest on it when she announced, she did like a sort of a letter that came with 1989, the Taylor's version of 1989, where she pointed out that whole bit about how she was spending more time with the women in her life, you know, after being sort of like slut shamed for a lot of her early 20s and focused on her female friendships. And then the media was like, she must be gay. So yeah, anyway, so she, or not media, but like people online. So yeah, so that was the kind of like the most explicit she's ever kind of gone against it, was that 1989 letter and that TikTok about Lavender Haze, where she kind of talked a little bit about the background of the song.
Totally. And I'm just thinking she's addressing this, you know, she's debunking it essentially. But I imagine that to the hardcore, you know, Gaylor truthers out there, there was still a way to like read that as they wanted to read it. Like maybe that's the record company forcing her to say something, or it's propaganda from X, Y, and Z. And I that's just how conspiratorial thinking works, I think, from this version to this version, which still isn't very okay to me. You know, it's like we shouldn't be doing this whole Gaylor thing. It's not really appropriate, but you know, there are lower stakes in this case than in some of the conspiracy theories that we hear about that are actually, you know, toppling our.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's such a fascinating thing. So, you know, I witnessed it online in sort of its like very early days of existing, and it was just kind of like a thing people were having fun with, you know, like people just kind of like, you know, it was started by gay, bi, queer fans of Taylor who just kind of were having a little bit of fun with this like idea that maybe she's like secretly dating the like her model best friend. And it was, you know, it was just like a silly corner of Swiftie internet for a while. And no one, you know, she was in public relationships with men. I don't think people doubted whether or not her and Joe Alwyn were in a real relationship, or her and Calvin Harris. You know, I think it was always taken with a grain of salt, this idea that like there's this theory online, and kind of watching it shift, like you mentioned, like it is very much that sort of like conspiratorial kind of mind, where it's like once you have this idea of someone or have this idea of like who they are, that's like the truest version of them. And I think that kind of again is sort of that toxic element of fandom and that toxic element of how, you know, how things can sort of like twist out of control or spiral out of control, is like so much of Taylor has been built on, you know, like my fans know me better than anyone else. And I think when you have that as like the basis of your self-marketing and self-branding, it was always a given that would end up kind of spiraling out. I mean, again, like probably not in the way that anyone in her camp ever probably anticipated, but you know, I think that has been so much of what has worked for her in the past and still works for her as sort of being a very popular artist who does have a very intimate relationship with her fans in that way. But the combination of the kind of scavenger hunting Easter egg element of it with this idea that you know me so well because you are my biggest fans created this like kind of very strange, weird moment of Taylor Swift fandom that, I mean, I think has like cooled off online a lot, especially given, you know, kind of the publicness of her relationship with Travis Kelce. But, you know, I think that there are still parts of it that exist, and still sometimes I kind of will come across accounts or certain stands online who still take it very, very seriously in a way that is kind of extreme.
They're holding on.
Yeah.
And you know, the way you're talking about this, the like, it started out as kind of a fun thing. You know, I remember hearing it and being like, ooh, that's fun. Like, that would be great. But that's about, you know, as much as I thought about it. And I think of like, let's go back to like the Bush years and think about like Beyonce and Lady Gaga and like, or maybe, you know, this may have been into Obama, but you know what I'm saying? Let's back up to the mid 2000s, early 2010s. And, you know, we've got Beyonce, we've got Lady Gaga. We're joking about them being in the Illuminati a lot, right? We're like, oh, this is funny. but other people are taking it really seriously, like scary seriously. And I wanted to kind of move on to, we've talked about the conspiracy theories like within the fandom, but then of course there are slightly darker conspiracy theories about Taylor coming from different forces, especially, you know, places like Fox News. So I kind of wanted to get into some of that because I know that there are ideas that she's a satanic, you know, symbol. We cover this all the time, you know, the Illuminati, all that kind of stuff. So when do you think these types of conspiracy theories about her being some kind of dark force started?
I have a firm belief that the minute that those start is the minute that you know that someone is famous. So they always exist like pretty much at the onset of someone becoming pretty famous. And so it's been around for a long time, you know, in that kind of sect of the internet that sort of looks at all celebrities as like these like evil dark forces. Obviously, again, Taylor Swift is a very next level celebrity. So it gets bigger and bigger, the bigger that she gets. And yeah, I mean, it's something that, you know, you tend to notice pretty much the minute someone becomes like slightly above average famous, you know, like, you know, with Lady Gaga, that was, you know, that happened by the end of her first album cycle. You know, Beyonce, it has been a big part of how people engage with her music and with her identity. And again, that's also kind of a difference between like white and black women in music, where I think like Beyonce actually has gotten it like a lot more intensely in terms of like Illuminati accusations and things like that. But yeah, I feel like it just sort of becomes a part of like the onset of any sort of like extreme fame or extreme presence that exists. So it's definitely been around for a long time. I think for Taylor, because she is a white woman who presents as a very like all-American type of girl next door and came from country music and had like 4th of July parties and was more of a kind of like blank canvas of political identity and of religious identity. You know, I think that it obviously became a bigger part of the conversation when her politics didn't align with that part of the internet and of culture, you know, and that sort of is kind of the turning point, I think, in terms of how it functioned for her, because prior to that, she was sort of like this like icon to white supremacists online and all that. So yeah, but it definitely, you know, it existed for a long time. I think all kind of pop music especially tends to be seen as super satanic. You know, people have always done that thing where they reverse the music to find like messages from the devil. And, you know, that's kind of always existed. So especially when she started to make non-country music, it became like a bigger part of it. But again, like worsened when she no longer could be that sort of blank canvas to people who are super evangelical and conservative.
Right. And, you know, it's so interesting because there are sometimes male pop stars that are considered to be part of the Illuminati. We've definitely heard that, you know, with Justin Bieber, I think was one of them, Jay-Z, of course, but nothing ever reaches the pinnacle of like the accusation of women pop stars being in the Illuminati. And as you mentioned, like a black woman in the Illuminati is like gonna, you know, I think that there's just a fear of the power that pop stars actually do hold over like such large groups of people. So it does make sense that like conservative people are afraid of their power. And, you know, that translates into these more extreme and eventually silly to us, not to the people telling them or the people listening to them. And that's when it gets, you know, it's, I think it's just pretty transparent that someone who's a woman and then, you know, Taylor, who, like you mentioned, kind of started out as like an apple pie girl next door, eventually dated enough men where she was seen more as like a viper or like some sort of, you know, some sort of succubus or something. And I think that also really contributed to this idea that there was like something nefarious about her.
Yeah, you know, there's this idea that she kind of like the whole like writing songs about, you know, her exes and things like that. The succubus type of thing is like very much like what was the underlying kind of narrative that existed for it. But yeah, I mean, I think especially when it doesn't sort of fit in with exactly how, virginal people want, more conservative kind of listeners and viewers want their, I mean, not even just conservative. I think this is just how people look at women generally, actually, kind of having that mold of both being someone who's like sexually attractive, but also like doesn't evoke what they've ever had sex type of thing. Britney Spears is like the biggest example of that. This idea that she had to present this certain way to be seen as desirable, but also once she leaned into it with any sort of agency is suddenly just a huge whore, like this idea of the kind of virgin whore dichotomy kind of existing within pop music. Obviously, Britney's a much more extreme example than even Taylor, but the way that sort of plays out even in milder ways is very fascinating. And Taylor is a kind of an example of someone who, once she got older, kind of expressed more of that agency and dated as a normal teen and 20 something. And now 30 something has dated, and the interaction with that is very strange.
Yeah. More after this. And now back to the show. So, a lot of stories, a lot of rumors, a lot of even conspiracy theories kind of started to come up when Taylor got her brand new super beefy boyfriend, Travis Chelsey. And, I think that there was obviously like a huge marriage, not literal, between, what Taylor represents, what Travis Chelsey represents, and then kind of what they represent when they're smashed together in culture. So what's that been like in terms of the fandom and in terms of people looking in and seeing something about that maybe they find secretly nefarious?
Yeah. So I guess it sort of coincided with this moment of here is Taylor at the most famous that anyone's ever been, which is in the midst of her Eras tour. It's in the midst of rolling out her re-records. It's like a year after Midnight. It's also like several months after, this is all happening in light of a pretty big breakup for her. I think there was a moment there where there was kind of a shift, I guess, in how people had talked about Taylor as a person kind of engaging with romantic relationships at this point of her life. Again, I the way that people talked about her relationships prior to Joe Alwyn, prior to her 30s, prior to a moment where we kind of had a reckoning with how people cover artists, especially women who are dating like, normal people. There's a little bit more of that kind of like agency, I guess, Taylor had over that. So she kind of enters this relationship with someone who's very unlike previous partners of hers. He's not an artist. He's not British. Here is this kind of all-American football player who's wildly beloved. I mean, I like don't even follow football, but I knew who Travis Kelce was. He has a really kind of great public image. He's won a Super Bowl. Kansas City Chiefs were doing well, I guess, already by the time they were dating and kind of on the way to the Super Bowl, and ended up winning while he's dating the biggest pop star in the world. So they kind of just like represented this like all-American couple in a way that Taylor has never really kind of existed in or like represented, even again with that sort of like all-American girl next door image that she's had. She's never kind of been in a partnership that sort of represented that. So it kind of like, became very like big, like homecoming king and queen vibes, popular kids in high school energy. I think it just sort of became this like love story people really attached themselves to. And that's on top of a very parasocial kind of dynamic that had sort of already been existing for a long time between Taylor and even casual fans of hers. But it just sort of ended up blowing up to this like really intense way where, again, like given her own politics being more liberal than I think people had hoped for, Travis Kelce his politics are a little like, I guess, like less obvious, but he does commercials for like Pfizer for vaccines and stuff, which, for a sect of very conservative right wing people that is a big no to support any sort of vaccine. So, I think that sort of became this like image both of this all American couple, but also they were pretty kind of liberal leaning in their own politics and yeah, like the way that they sort of presented in the world. So that, of course, led to conspiracy theories on the right around her involvement in them winning the Super Bowl.
Okay, if I was a conspiracy theorist, I do think I might fall for this because it is such a wild story, right? Like most famous, beloved pop star meets, famous now Super Bowl winning, all American kind of golden retriever like dude. And, it does seem not completely. I mean, obviously, it's out of the realm of possibility because huge conspiracy theories like this are not possible to pull off. But it is so wild that these two people at this time came together and, brought pop fans into football, and the idea that maybe the NFL planned it to help ratings. And there's so many things I think in this kind of perfect story that you talked about happening. And, it's like, okay, I get the idea that maybe it's a PR move and maybe that PR move turned into a relationship they didn't expect. Like, I think that's the most reasonable conspiracy theory. I think they probably just met and liked each other like in a normal way.
Yeah.
But some people go as far, like Jesse Walters of Fox News called her a Pentagon psyop, right?
Yeah.
Because I think they thought that the Super Bowl was going to be some announcement, some giant like Joe Biden endorsement. And, of course it didn't happen. And I don't know, she's been called like a Trojan horse. And it's just such a fascinating thing to watch these conspiracy theories hit the most popular conservative, the most popular probably in general news channel, where they are now decoding these little things and trying to put it together. And it's just been wild to watch these grown conservative men debating Taylor Swift.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's like a big, again, being someone who came from country music, whose main home base is still Nashville, and who, was pretty like apolitical for a really long time. I wouldn't say that she's like super political now, but, has made it much more clear. She has made a point to support Democratic politicians. She has made it very clear where she stands on some very, very big issues. But I think it was just kind of like I think because she didn't say anything for a long time, and especially during the election in 2016, that blank canvas part of her became something that a lot of right-wing, MAGA-leaning conservative politicians really clung on to. And there seems to be like a level of hurt that it wasn't true. I think even like the way that Trump has posted about her and said and talked about her, there's like a pain that he has that she's not on his side, that they don't have like the biggest celebrity in the world being like a vocal right-wing star. It seems like there's like a betrayal that they feel, even though, there's nothing to betray. But I think there's a certain level of like this expectation and desire for her to still come onto their side, because she sort of is this like peak in like another world. She'd be sort of like a peak kind of like, blonde hair, blue eyed, Fox Newsy type of person. Maybe if she stayed in country, maybe if she kind of, never moved to New York and never kind of had this kind of other sort of side of her own cultural and musical awakening, maybe that would be the case. Who knows? But yeah, I feel like there's a pain that comes with that.
I think that's such an interesting perspective, just like that there is some kind of underlying pain. And it makes sense with Trump because it's like, he never gets the cool ones. He doesn't.
Yeah.
It never happened.
It's like you get Kid Rock.
That's it. You get Kid Rock and that's it. And it's very embarrassing for sure. And I think that he is aware of that on some level, that it is embarrassing. And, before you mentioned the fact that she was at one point this like weird alt-right, not herself obviously, but people projected, again, more conspiratorial projection in a very different way onto her for, you know, being this kind of possible queen of the alt-right or this like pinnacle of white supremacy. What was going on with that, if you know much about it? Because I really don't know a lot.
It was more of like an internet based thing. Like she just sort of like these like white supremacist kind of corners of the internet, all the ways that they sort of communicate both on social media, but also in like these like private chats and different kind of like Signal, but like the apps that they use, that their own sort of like private ways of like communicating and I don't know, sharing white supremacist info, whatever they do. But she sort of became like the face of it for a lot of them. And she ended up denouncing it pretty clearly and specifically. But yeah, it just sort of, it spiraled out for a while of her kind of becoming this like image of the, I don't know, peak American white woman, I guess. But I think they just sort of grabbed onto her when she wasn't saying anything.
Yeah, like a blank canvas. And she has been that in a lot of ways, like you've already mentioned that. And I think that that does make a lot of sense, you know, and now she's like the target of like terror plots like this. It's like we can try to avoid talking about Taylor Swift if we want to, like I think a lot of people do, but like you cannot ignore the fact that like in so many ways it feels like our culture is like a planet rotating her sun right now. And it's such a, I just feel like it's so important to understand her effect and understand the way that her effect has been historically true, the way that it's new, and the way that, you know, like, where is it going? Like, where does pop music go next? Do you have a vision at all of what you think is going to kind of become of Taylor Swift as she gets older? And like, I don't know. It's like, I think of Britney Spears. I think of all these beloved people and how hard it is to keep your own life together when you're this famous and you're dealing with like pressures that none of us can comprehend at all. So like, do you see Taylor getting out of the cycle of, I mean, because she was basically a child star, I would say, right? Like she started
Yeah.
15, 16, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like I think that at least just like what I have sort of inferred and kind of from my own sort of witnessing of the last couple of years, like it seems like she just wants to be in it, which is maybe something I just like can't understand. But I'm not meant to relate to that. But like, it seems like she really does thrive on it, on this bigness, on this omnipresence in a way that many people do not. And, she's in one of the most public relationships she's ever had in her entire life. And it seems like she's really enjoying that, I think even just for that context, like, her relationships she's never done that whole like, she's making out in the middle of a football field with her boyfriend. She's never even brought dates to red carpets. She never posted any of her part. She posted Calvin Harris on social media, and that was the most they ever did, was like sometimes post some like Instagrams about each other. This is like a very unusual level. This is the most public she's ever been with any partner she's had in like nearly 2 decades of being famous. And she seems to really enjoy it because it's also at like a time where she is like the most everywhere she's ever been. And also wrote an entire album about how much she hated being, in a prison that she called her sort of privacy of her last relationship. So I don't know, like it's very fascinating to me because I kind of thought that there was a part of those moments when she stepped away for a while that led to some of, I found, her best work creatively. I think like Folklore and Evermore is a great example of that. I mean, I think Reputation's like one of her best albums. And I think that came from a period of kind of stepping away from the spotlight for a minute and led to, I think, one of her most interesting albums. I'm curious what it will mean for the future after Eras Tour ends. She's teased a lot of other projects outside of music. She's talked about, she wrote a movie, I guess, that she wants to direct. I think there's a part of her, and she's always been sort of obsessed with the way women age in music and in media. She wrote songs when she was 22 about that, about feeling like she won't be the new shiny thing anymore. And it's always been sort of a weird kind of, not weird. I mean, it's a pretty reasonable thing to kind of fear and kind of be very self-aware of. But, it's something that seems to kind of like haunt her and seems to kind of follow her for a lot of it. Even on Tortured Post part, when she has the song Clara Bow, where she has the line, "You look like Taylor Swift." Like, it's kind of this like idea of just like moving on to the next thing, or people replicating who you were or, what you've made. I think she's just trying to take as much advantage out of being in this like creative prime of her life. She's releasing so much music. She's on this like, massive tour and doesn't seem to even want it to end, but it has to. I think she just kind of wants to lean into all of it. I don't know how much longer that will last or be sustainable because it's a lot, but I think she's just going to keep doing it and do it at this like really massive level for as long as it is creatively fulfilling for her. At the moment, it seems to be like a big part of where she's at right now. But yeah, I don't know what that means for the future, because it's like after Folklore and Evermore, my answer was very different than it is now, because I thought that I was like, oh, like she'll probably want to step away for a minute. Like maybe she just like wants to chill for a second. It's like, actually, she clearly does not want to chill at all for even 1 second. And I guess that's where we're at with Taylor.
And we can say no matter what she does, there will be conspiracy theories about it.
Yeah. Constantly.
I only imagine the conspiracy theories when, God forbid she leaves this earthly plane. It's probably going to get, I assume like Elvis, there is going to be this idea that Taylor Swift is somewhere out there, like for the rest of time.
Yeah.
She is timeless now. So thank you so much, Brittany, for coming on the show. This has been, I feel very enlightened. I feel much more like culturally aware around Taylor Swift. And I know our audience probably does too. So thanks again for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
This was American Hysteria. You can follow Brittany Spanos on Twitter at ohheybrittany with 2 T's, or on Instagram at Brittany Spanos. You can find links in our show notes. If you'd like to support our show and make sure that we can keep making it for as long as possible, you can become a patron at patreon.com/American Hysteria or subscribe to our show on Apple Plus. You'll get ad-free episodes as well as access to Hysteria Home Companion, the podcast that I do with our producer Miranda, where we tell you stories that were cut from the episodes or stories that we know that you'll love. And you'll also get access to our friends only Instagram, where you'll get secret updates, behind the scenes content, bloopers, pictures of my cats, and much, much more. That's patreon.com/American Hysteria or subscribe on Apple Plus. It's a huge way to help us out. Another huge way to help us out is to leave us a review on the app that you're using. You can follow us on Instagram at American Hysteria Podcast. And if you head to AmericanHysteria.com, you can pick up some of our merch or leave us a message on the Urban Legends hotline about a tale that you remember from growing up or one you've heard recently, and we might do a whole investigation about it. American Hysteria's producer and editor is Miranda Zickler. Our associate producer is Riley Swedelius Smith, and I'm your host, Chelsey Weber-Smith. Thanks, as always, for listening, and I hope you have a great